Aloha, aloha, familia. Welcome back. This is the Revolution Podcast. I'm glad you're here. I'm joined in person, excited about this one, with soul sister Ariellebrown. And we're going in deep, y'all, about artful penetration, men and women's movements, relating, and actually I would call it a fact or an experiential fact that how you lead in any container is going to be correlated to how you love. Mm-hmm. Straight up. Mm-hmm. And thank you for that epic phrase, because I think it's so pertinent, so powerful. But to provide some quick context how we met, I was in Costa Rica earlier this year for some masterminds. I had seen you in the digital space and you reached out to work together. Mm-hmm. And we had some really powerful discovery calls, and I remember a moment where you were fully out. And then it was like, okay. And then I remember calling you out and up, and then you came fully in, and we actually did end up doing a program together. And, you know, I still say this, and I'm actually using your testimonial in my online course, that Beautiful. You've been one of the most illuminating people to work with, because I feel like I've learned probably as much or more from you as you might have learned from me, right?
I definitely called. I required a lot. I asked a lot of you because I was so fully leaned into the container, and it was such a growth edge for me with the time that I was at, that I could feel that.
Totally, and it was amazing. Like it called me into my best. Mm-hmm. Like I showed up in like a high level. But yeah, I'm curious for those listening and watching. You know, how would you? Like, I don't want to introduce what you do because I feel like I have an insider look, and also it's all new. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's a lot has evolved since we closed our container, which was months ago. So how would you introduce yourself now? I know you are an intimacy catalyst, a coach of sorts, but
mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. So I work with people one-on-one and in groups, and I feel like the main thing that I'm doing is helping people to come into alignment with their higher selves through thoughts, beliefs, emotions, actions, looking at the gap between what our soul, what our higher self is calling us to do, be, have in the world, and where our ego, the part of us that's still caught in, you know, the fear, the scarcity, is acting counter to what it is that we truly desire. And so much of that has been showing up in the way I work with people around sexuality. I've worked with all genders, and right now where I'm working is with men around how do they attune to their own feminine energy, how do men become artful leaders and artful lovers. There's so much breakdown between men and women right now, and I'm really drawn towards that intersection between where can men and women come together from a place of pleasure, from a place of power, and from a place of presence.
Right, the P's, love those P words, those P acronyms and words. So this is fascinating because at one point did you believe you were going to be working with women?
I mean, I started out working with women. Like when I first started my work, I came into it through the conduit of my relationship to my body. When I was in college, I was so, I would say, addicted to the idea of finding my partner, my one, that I wound up having sex with a whole bunch of men from the standpoint of thinking, if I have sex with men, it means that they'll fall in love with me, it'll mean that they commit to me. And amidst all that, you know, figuring out my own sexuality, I also had a really challenging relationship with my body. Negative body image, binge eating, chronic dieting. So I moved to California, thought I was going to become a professional chef, which I did, but then wound up getting to this breaking point with food and my body where it just became this fixation around how do I keep my body small? And I realized I just couldn't do that anymore because it was consuming so much of my energy. So I actually got certified as an eating psychology coach and started working with women around body image, and inevitably that took me down the track of sexuality, because while I was healing my relationship with food, I kept finding that I was losing myself in relationship with men. And while I'd had so many sexual experiences with men, the amount of truly pleasurable sexual experiences where I felt able to connect with my body and prioritize what I want was small. So I wound up going down the sexual healing path and working with women around coming into their bodies and self-expression and power. And I've just come to this place where I feel strong enough in my own inner masculine, and I feel such a desire to bridge the sexes together that men's work is what's being asked of me right now, and I love it.
Right. It's fascinating. So, yeah, there's something really important here with the feminine, and especially in female bodies, about wanting to be loved, right? And wanting to just embody love and just radiate it. And that inevitably ends up with the body itself and the image, right? And this is, something I've had experience with the people I've worked with and past partners around, body image and food in particular. And so I'm curious, for women listening, like, what was a pivotal piece in you coming to a place of love and acceptance as opposed to like that inner fight?
Totally. Well, I remember right when I was I was working in a cafe, and I was also taking this eating psychology course, and one of the books they recommended was The Gift of Our Compulsions. And for anyone who feels like they struggle with any type of compulsive behaviors, I highly recommend this book, written by Mary O'Malley. And she would talk about how when we go into a compulsive behavior, the gift of that compulsion means that the thing beneath the compulsion, like there's something true that's rising for us beneath the desire to distract ourselves with the compulsion. So for me, it was the desire to compulsively eat. And like I was so attached to the idea of controlling my food intake to keep my body small that there was a seed of wisdom in it, which was just like, what if you just let go of the need to control your intake? What if you just trusted that your body was going to find right relationship with itself? But what if you just let go of the control? And there was something about the time and the place and the way it was said that landed for me, and I was just able to let go. And that doesn't mean that my relationship with food and body doesn't continue to have places to grow, but I am no longer focusing 90% of my mental energy on trying to keep my physical body small.
Right.
I think there's this quote by a woman named Naomi Campbell, and she talks about the obsession with female fitness is not about weight, it's about female subjugation. And I am misquoting her, but just talking about how the industry that's built on keeping women's bodies small is a way of keeping women out of their power and channeling their energy into that which brings them more fully into their bodies and in service to the earth.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, because even look historically and ancestrally, how many women they were considered beautiful and powerful in positions of power when they had full feminine bodies. And I think the body image that's handed down from magazines and movies and media is not only toxic, but there's a disempowering element there. And so I think we can leave that there. The point stands for the feminine listening.
Well, the other challenge with it that I want to add in is in women's relationship with our bodies and pleasure is there's been so much conditioning where like a woman's body is not for her own pleasure, that a woman's body is for the pleasure and service of a man or of another individual. And I know that I'm generalizing right now, and I know that in a way it's been so long since that's been true, but that collective conditioning still exists within us around we as women really choosing that our bodies are for us as the primary point.
Yeah, and this has to do with, I know, the male gaze and how media is even portrayed. Like most films and certainly pornography is all about the male gaze. And I'm not as familiar with that literature, but every time I come across it, it's highly revealing and intuitive to me. And I look to people like Timothy Leary, Yogi Bhajan, Malcolm X, who all pointed out in different ways that the way to subjugate an entire culture is to subjugate the women. Because then the women teach the children, and the women are like behind the men in the households. So if you hit them, and this is like divide and conquer tactics, the whole culture becomes trapped, right? And Malcolm X was going to Africa during the 1970s, and I'm not like advocating the whole ideology of these people, but these points are salient. When he was going to Africa and back, the story goes that some of these tribal leaders are just like, look at your women, look at the women in America. This is why you're fucked, because their education, body image, psychology, economic growth, physical bodies, etc., is under attack, and so they feel unsafe. The children being born to them are unsafe. The men in relation with them are unsafe. It's a whole thing,
right? Because if the women are disempowered and disconnected from their bodies, we see so many men wanting to express themselves and wanting to be embodied in their power and feel like they can bring their full desire into relationship with women. But if we're breeding fragile women, we're not actually, but the idea of being fragile, and if we're disconnected from our bodies, not connected to our own masculine energy, or not in right relationship with our masculine energy, how can the men, fully embody themselves with the women?
Exactly. And this is a huge point, and maybe we should just transition straight into the masculine feminine dynamic. And I would say a debate, like daily. I don't know if it's just my bubble of the algorithm, but I'm seeing constant posting about this gender war, whatever, I don't even want to call it that, but this is how Fox News would deliver the headline. And something interesting to point out, shout out to Jillian Pothier, who's been on the podcast. Hey
Jillian.
Epic, I know you know her. She's an epic, just feminine leader and thinker. And she posted today basically the absurdity that goddess circles and female empowerment is so ubiquitous, but if I tomorrow started a god circle and started posting images of phallus power and all this stuff, it would be a firestorm. It would be a taboo firestorm. And maybe we can just use that as an opening point to speak to what you just already started to contextualize, which is the disempowered masculine, or the collapsed masculine as it exists in men and women, right? Because we all have these elements inside of us. It's beyond gender.
Yeah. Well, there's so many different directions I could go, but I'll
leave it to you.
Yeah, I'll start with, when the Me Too movement happened, a year and a half ago, the Me Too movement in itself, in its purest form, is such a beautiful opportunity and container for women to feel permission to express themselves in a way that perhaps they've never felt. That's not true. I believe there are times where women were fully embodied in their expression, but it kind of opened up a portal for all of this.
On a mass scale.
Yes. And the challenge is when we are disconnected from our power for so long, and then we open up that channel, often it's not like a slow opening. Right. Often it's like the fire hose has been pinched for so long, and then it opens and it's just like zoom. And the challenge with that is, one, we're not calibrated in the expression of our power and our desire. And what I mean by that is, if you haven't been expressing your power for a really long time, it can come out messy. Right. It can come out, it's like the difference between using your power with a jagged dagger as opposed to a clean sword. Do you use your power cleanly? And the challenge that I felt with the Me Too movement is that there is so much pent up resentment and anger and entitlement that I feel like I saw so many women perpetuating so much of the same toxicity that they were fighting against. And perhaps that's something that just needs to have space held for it, similar to racism and the anger that's been built up for so long, and the need to just have that come out in whatever form it does. But what I see and saw was so many men who weren't direct perpetrators, perhaps, perpetuating little microaggressions, but feeling like there's not space for their voice, and that they just kind of need to become silent while all this venom and poison is being unleashed upon them. And these men don't actually have the tools of protecting themselves energetically and being connected to their own grounding. And there's just a whole bunch of imbalance going on right now.
Right. And this is, I've spoken a lot about this because it comes up, and people message me or drop little snide comments when I talk about the empowerment of men. And I was speaking on this in another podcast, men have been just as subjugated as women historically. And it may not be as evident with the narratives that are running rampant, but that is just true. Look at the military. When a young man is drafted in Vietnam, for example, try to understand that feeling. Someone you don't know, you're going to be shipped across the world to kill them. And this is all for state and country, and everyone's praising you. And how does that man feel in his inner world, And that's one layer. And this isn't about who has more trauma and who gets to heal first or something. Like it's a team effort. You know, it's men and women versus like the forces of anti-life.
Yeah, and it's different forms of like gender subjugation. When you tell me about that, I think of a male client of mine who's a retired CIA operative and ex-Navy SEALs. Wow. And so much of what we're working with is just helping him to actually know what it means to be in his body and connected to his emotions so that he can actually have fulfilling relationships in his life.
Right.
We were in an in-person immersion together, and one of the people in his platoon jumped off of an 8-story building to try and kill himself, and there is just this common thread of the emotion, the vulnerability, the sensitivity needs to be taken out of the equation so that these men can perform.
Right.
And then how does it actually get integrated back in so that we can have meaningful relationships?
Right. And this is unfortunately like an archetypal thing with the masculine, is like it happens on the military level where someone's sent off, right? But it also happens in the romantic tale of the hero and the Disney programming, where like the hero, the male usually, goes out to rescue a princess, slays dragons, fights wars, discovers treasure, etc., all metaphors for inner psychic reinforcements or resources, I think. This is very Jungian, Campbellian kind of view. But then when he returns home and actually gets the princess, he has no training, no context, and no understanding of what to do with her, or how to be in the home. Yeah. And this is, veterans are an extreme example, but I think a lot of men, myself included, my experience of like seeking and striving and then coming into a tribal or collective container or relationship with a woman, like that can be where all this shit comes up, right? Totally. And that's the dojo. It's like, whoa, all the unmet needs, all the desires, all the emotion, as a man who is conditioned to not use that, now must be faced in a high, seemingly low stakes environment, but high intensity, because there's nowhere to run.
Yeah, and this is where I think of I forget from what origin the story comes from, but there's the story of like the priestesses in the temple who, when the men went to war,
right,
the men would come back and into the temple of the priestess, and the women would fuck the war out of them and send them out as love. Right. And I believe that this archetype exists in every woman, but if we're conditioned, like I know for myself, so much of my deconditioning was just to let go of the conditioning that the man knows and I don't. Like the man has the answers and I don't. But I believe in this relational realm, in this vulnerability realm, in this sensitivity realm, this is actually a location where we as women can teach men, because right, there's more familiarity and permission societally for us to be more comfortable in these realms. But if we as women aren't trusting ourselves and we're not validating our intuition, and if the man, if I'm being heteronormative right now, but if the man across from us is not validating our own emotional experience, that the default can just be, at least for me it was like, well, I must be wrong because this person across from me isn't validating this invisible thing that I feel between us. So again, it's like the masculine, feminine, like we as women are needing to cultivate that inner masculine within us that is able to be grounded and is able to guide and is able to lead and be in conviction in our truth.
Right, so powerful. Like, I forget who quotes this, but we're basically in an emotional dark age. Because emotional intelligence, the EQ, has been not only not valued, it's not even in the conversation traditionally. Where IQ is worshipped and performance and intelligence and blah, 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 problem-solving consciousness. Meanwhile, like, divorce rate is an obvious statistic to point at. Single mothers, never been higher. And male suicide, 9 times more likely than female, which you've already presence, And this to me is just, it's a huge red flag and a clarion call to us as the new inheritors of culture in the West, that like, this isn't working, obviously. So now, like, what are the tactical, strategic things we can do, and what needs to be held, just, some of it's not even tactical or strategical, it's just what needs to be held space for. And I think the feminine rage of Me Too is one of those things. And there's a point at which you can like turn the fire hose off because it's relieved enough pressure, and now it's becoming gratuitous.
Well, and perhaps it's not even turning the fire hose off, but it's learning how to be in composure of our own power, so that we don't need to stifle the life force energy that's running through us, but we actually trust our ability to hold the amount of power and energy that wants to flow through us, which requires us to face just how powerful we are, which I also feel like at this time in the collective, we're also waking up to these latent abilities, these psychic abilities, these energetic abilities, realizing that we are human beings incarnated, like that we are like God exists within us, and we have the capacity to channel the cosmos through our beings because we are from the stars. So we're waking up to all these abilities of like, I could be communicating with you non-verbally right now. We could be having an entire conversation and realizing there's a whole new skill set that needs to be cultivated because like our superpowers are coming online right now.
Right. And one of those superpowers is like, it's empathic abilities that border telepathy. What like science fiction tells us is telepathy like already exists, which is just like subtle nonverbal cues, like pheromones. There's a whole science to this that actually I'm fascinated by. But I'm curious for you, like, to switch gears a little bit in the direction of, because we could just talk about this. Like
it feels like a good transition point.
It's so good,
Yeah.
What do you see as like, for men, what do you see as like the major hurdle right now in the culture to men embodying and reclaiming, let us call it the inner feminine soul, the anima, the, like you're saying, like a lot of the emotion was put on hold, feeling, sensation, perception was put on hold because it was unsafe to feel, or more than likely you got to get the job done, suck it up. Like, I have my own idea about this, and I'm curious for you and what you're doing. Like, what do you see that point is?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that I don't actually think that I can answer the question of what can men do without knowing that in order for it to work, women also have to come into greater awareness to actually receive the changes that the men do, so men can actually receive positive feedback for what it is that they're doing. So for me, it's like when you first reached out, what do you want to talk about? I was like, oh, artful penetration. And to me, that doesn't just apply to sex, but it's like how, like if everything that we do in life is sex, where it's like, I'm penetrating you with my words right now, and you are receiving my words right now. And then when you respond, you're penetrating me with your ideas, and I'm receiving them. So to me, attunement and artful penetration means that when a man is expressing himself, or when he is inserting himself inside a woman, is the willingness to connect his primal sexual desire with his sensitivity, with his heart, so that he's actually willing to feel his penetration every step of the way.
Right.
You know, I've been doing a lot of like I had this moment, a few months ago with a lover where he was about to penetrate inside of me, and in that moment I just was so fully present with him, like every step of moving inside of me, as opposed to just checking out. And just so many of my experiences as a woman, it's like, oh, a man's going inside of me and I'm just passive in the experience of it. But to be so present in that moment of penetration, so that we're actually aware of our impact, we're able to feel intuitively a woman opening it. Again, we're heteronormalizing right now. I need to acknowledge there's a whole range.
And I trust the people listening can discover that nuance for themselves.
So I feel like it's a willingness, like, man, your desire and your power are so wanted and so needed. That's not what the issue is. What we as women are wanting is to feel you connected with us every step of the way. Feeling, am I open to receiving you right now? And then we can shift out of like harder, faster is more pleasurable to there's so much pleasure in the slow.
Right.
Like for men to invite their sensitivity, to me, is like opening yourself up to a level of pleasure and fulfillment and nourishment in every aspect of life that can't happen if you're disconnected from your emotions.
Right. And this has been speaking a lot to what I can relate to in my experience with yeah, being afraid of big emotion in the past because its ability to overwhelm the mind, which I think for men, a lot of men can probably relate, can be frightening when you're used to a logical, structured, and hyper-rational reality. But there's the nuance with the feminine, and it's no more obvious than lovemaking is like the pinnacle. But like you said, everything is penetration and reception. Whether it's you watching this video or listening to this podcast, whether it's you creating an art piece or a business, like that's a way to deal with the world and penetrate it. So, what if like one of the secrets to success or whatever, law of attraction, use all these like phrases, is to have the sensitivity the whole way of what you are creating, what is the effect it's having on reality, especially taking into account other people. And most importantly, like the outward effects are great, like transformation, money, relationships, but it's actually the inner alchemy, like you said. Are you willing to feel and be cooked by the intensity of this subtle emotion and these transformations that are happening inside of you as you penetrate or create?
Yeah.
And that's the alchemical mind fuck of like, it's not even about the external thing. This is for your own benefit to get to feel what that feels like. And obviously to share your love and your service with the world. But like, it's this reciprocal dance. And I think I definitely used to miss out on that in the past. I used to miss out on that piece because I was so like projecting, like just like, oh, let me just like, I'll just bypass that, not right now, like I need to do this, and like and that led to a lot of going on my own healing journey and benders of healing, because that stuff doesn't go anywhere. Emotional energy is still there. It doesn't just disappear. It creates residue and it creates
and
blockages.
It creates the void. Like it's, to me, that's where the hungry ghost.
Right.
So it's like the hungry ghost is the ghost that keeps putting food in its mouth, but the food keeps falling out. So no matter how much food or money or like sex goes through, it's not actually satiating. And I feel like that's where we could see so much of the the usurping and overuse of Mother Nature's resources and greed and power. Like I feel so much of this is just from being desensitized from our bodies. So we're hungry for something, but we don't actually know how to nourish ourselves. So I feel like this is what the invitation is, to coming back into fully inhabiting our bodies and realizing just how sensitive we are.
Yeah, it always comes back to the body. Like the body's the temple. It's also the site at which all experience, it's the nexus of experience. Like this is where I think the transcending, hyper disembodied and disassociative spiritual paths, while the witness and like getting out of your own shit to like look at it is good, I think overuse of that has caused a lot of suffering on the planet. But again, that's a whole nother rabbit hole. You said something really powerful I want to loop back to, because this doesn't get addressed very often in these circles, at least the ones I'm in, and this is just medicine. You said that women get to be open to receiving the men after they've done their work, or after them showing up in a new way.
Yeah.
Because I've had women reach out to me about their man goes to a men's circle, whatever, they're in a partnership, and he's opening up sensitivity and suddenly he's emotionally available.
Yeah.
But then, and not even like them doing it consciously, maybe unconsciously, they're still expecting the desensitized man and then shame him for not replaying the old pattern. That's like an extreme example.
Interesting.
But
I'm actually curious how, can you give an example?
Well, yeah, like a man wanting to be emotionally available and being like, hey, I've been doing this work and I want to share it with you. And she's like, can't you just like suck it up? Like I need to be emotional right now, or like something like that, where it creates more distance.
Yeah, well, and that's where, I'm feeling that call to start working with women more again. And I feel like that the location that needs to be addressed is women's, like you were talking about the Disney princess, for example. There's so much conditioning in women around assuming the man is the rock. There's something outside of me that creates that safety. So if I have a man in my life, he's the person that makes me feel safe. But the challenge is that means that we're not cultivating our ability to create our own safety in our own bodies, which is part of the masculine energy. And the challenge with that is that if we're, as women, aren't cultivating our own masculine energy, we can't actually invite in a whole man. like an integrated man with his masculine and feminine, because we won't be able to hold him in his feminine.
Right. Which, I mean, it comes back to, this is an inside job. Like, if you're not aware of, the ability to provide for yourself, feel safe in your body, create structure and order, and be decisive as a woman, then like all those things will get outsourced to a man, and then failure and expectations and the drama begins. And likewise, as a man, if you're unable to do self-care, have emotional intelligence, tap into sensitivity, understand your own subtle processes that are beyond just going to work or performing, you'll outsource that onto a woman. And I've had that experience of like codependency of, as a man, outsourcing my own emotional processing to a woman, and like just like needing her to basically mother me at the extreme, and on the other extreme, I'll just bypass for me to check out, because I'm like, oh, let me just go to the woman because I can't deal with this. Like,
a teacher of mine, do you know Kasia Urbaniak? So she's an ex-dominatrix who now teaches women on how to be in relationship with power and how to be in relationship with men. And she would call that invisible labor on the part of women, like taking an inventory of all the invisible labor we're doing because of carrying the unclaimed emotional experience of the men in their life that's kind of put on the shoulders of women, and to just take inventory of that. So I just wanted to name as a little, I love that.
I love that. It's so good.
And I also wanted to, we were talking about the benefits of men cultivating their sensitivity, because I imagine some men might be like, why would I want to cultivate sensitivity? I want to be a manly man, and because women are attracted to manly men. However, I've been thinking about, like, there were a couple of experiences with two different lovers in my life over the past year where they came at me with so much desire and so much intensity that it was overwhelming. And I was able to have it be a pleasurable experience, but just feeling like this man is not fully calibrating to my body and what I'm available for, and it can be completely overwhelming to the system. And if we as women are learning how to come into our body and communicate our yes and our no. I'm not abdicating women from responsibility. It's just we are recovering from so many decades and centuries of feeling like we're not allowed to have a voice, that we'll be killed for having a voice, that we're not, like, that it's not safe to inhabit our bodies because so many things have been done to it that cause pain, that have just been like, okay, well, I'm just going to dissociate and not be in my body because it's too painful. But what winds up happening is when men come in, and they come in with their desire to penetrate and their power, but they're not also sensitive, then we as women wind up being way more guarded and vigilant, even if we want the experience, but because we can feel like that the man is not fully connected to his own sensitivity and to ours, our body is more contracted, because while we're wanting to receive the pleasure, we're also wanting to make sure that it's safe. And that, like, it's safe for us to open, and that if it's too much, the man is going to be connected to his sensitivity enough that when we say stop or slow down, that he's actually going to be able to hear us and isn't just disconnected from the upper because he's so, like, activated in the lower. So when men start to do this sensitivity work, even if women don't realize it on a conscious level, our bodies and our nervous systems can feel a man connected to his sensitivity, which allows us as women to relax. And I have a feeling most men would agree that when a woman is relaxed and able to get out of her mind and into her body, it's an immensely more pleasurable experience for everyone involved.
Exactly. And this, I'm also, like, correlating it to money and, art. Like, how do you run a business? How do you deliver content or deliver a message, a painting, a song, whatever? If you come in too strong, even if it's brilliant and the audience isn't receptive, this is the art of marketing or whatever, but it's beyond that, then it's never going to be received, and the epicness that you're creating, that you're excited about and passionate to the world, it's not going to be received. And this is what I think a lot of coaches are struggling with. Certainly I see so many struggling with this, and I have in the past.
I can so resonate with that. Like, even just, I don't know if you've played with the magic of, like, you post immensely on Facebook. I know for me, one of the practices was more than what a post says, whether people realize it or not, they can feel the energetic of like when the post is done. So whenever I do a Facebook post, it's really feeling into like where's my energy at when I'm inserting this post into the world? Like, do I have an agenda? Do I want something in return? Or am I offering this because it feels good, because it feels resonant, because it feels of service? So the energetic of everything.
Totally. And this is that art of penetration, and the art of knowing when you'll be received, and also the art of receiving, because the paradox of this is that if you know how to be sensitive enough to your partner, to a woman, to penetrate, the other side is you will know how to receive, because you understand like the nuance and the subtlety. And the way I frame this for men, and I think Tantra has a lot to teach about it, is this is actually a high form of intelligence and a high form of mastery, which speaks deeply to the core masculine desires, is to be masterful and to actually express yourself skillfully in a perfected way. Bruce Lee talks about true mastery is like when you want to express yourself, why he trains so hard is so he could do it instantly and with fidelity. Like, I want to express myself this way, boom. And like martial arts, it might be throwing a punch or throwing a kick, but in relationship, it actually is much more nuanced, because it's like there's so many factors, and desire is such a fickle thing because it can transform itself and transport itself to all these different places. And so, I was speaking at another interview about, it's funny, my life is so full of interviews at this point that like I'm like mapping them together. I'm like, oh yeah, this goes here, and I was speaking like there's 64 arts in the traditional Hindu like formula for life, let's say. And that's what these yogis and these ascetics were doing, who created Hatha Yoga and Tantra. But long story short, of the 64 arts, which you can imagine of being a householder, a person, there's 64 arts. Lovemaking was considered the highest, and the paradigmatic one that informed all the others in a way. And it was second only to like singing and dancing or like painting.
That makes so much sense to me. Like there's so much agenda laden in our culture around sexuality. Like the peak, you want the climax, you want the most intense thing. So when there's so much gratification possible, like I was going to say, who doesn't love orgasm? But I'm sure there are people who don't love orgasm, so I'm not going to generalize
theoretically
there. But it's one of the most pleasurable things we can experience. So if we look at the experience of sex and just broadcast that to the whole spectrum of life, we exist in a culture that's so focused on the destination. We want like the pop. We want to get to the climax. We want to get the raise. We want to get the money. We want to get the orgasm. And what that often winds up doing is taking us out of the present moment and in like the rush towards getting to the thing at the end of the tunnel. So in the practice of sexuality, when there's so much focus on goal and where we're getting to be able to come back to the present moment over and over again, and it's also one of the most vulnerable locations to be, and to opt out of performance and to instead be so connected to like, this is who I am and what is true for me in the moment. And when I allow sex to be about connection as opposed to trying to get there, and to make sure that I'm not leaving my partner behind in sacrifice of where I think it should go. Like again, how does that apply to the way that we're doing politics? How does that apply to the way that we're building countries, communities?
Yeah, and if the world had been created with this kind of sensitivity, I think like ipso facto, a lot of the issues and systemic things wouldn't even be present, because there would have been this artful creativity in how do you design a society, how do you design an economy, how do you design the family value system, and this is part of the fractal we're living in. And one of the trippy things about reality is the microcosm is a reflection of the macrocosm. So as individual couples, or individuals, let's say first, start going into these territories, the big systems which we rally against, right, like, oh, I'm gonna get Trump out of office and all this stuff, like that will reflect what's happening on the micro level, which, like, what is the story of humanity? This is a really fascinating thing that Jordan Peterson goes into. Like, the story of humanity is men and women contending with nature together as a team. It's not men versus women. It's men and women being on this planet, not knowing where we came from, not knowing why we're here, and not knowing where we're going, right? Death is this ultimate mystery door, birth being the other side of it. Men and women had to figure shit out. And so we're living with the inheritance of a long time of that happening. But the story of humanity is relationship to the earth. Like the Balinese have a really beautiful, I forget the Bahasa for it, but life happens in relationship. The story of humanity's relationship. And the Balinese, which I spent a lot of time there this summer, basically have 3 types of relationships that you keep. First one is to God, right? To the gods, etc., to the divine. Second one is to nature and the earth itself. So you got up and down, and then they got the horizontal dimension, your relationship to all beings. And at the center of that is your family and your blood relations and your partner, and then it echoes out to all beings, including the 4-legged ones, the winged ones, the finned ones. And I thought that was just so beautiful because it's like such a duh, but that's like a core principle of life and lifestyle, because if you're not in right relationship with all those things, you know, you're fucked.
I love that. I love that. And I want to weave in another story from this. I didn't read the book, but I saw the movie called The Celestine Prophecy.
Oh yeah.
And did you see that one? So,
I haven't seen the movie, but I've read the book and interviewed James Redfield.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. So I can't share all the, you know, the 10 different, you know, insights of it, but basically the story is, you know, at the beginning, like all of humanity inherently knew that it was connected to the source of life that is all things. But at some point, humanity forgot that they were connected to this source that supplied everyone with an infinite amount of love, resources, that there was just more than enough. And as we forgot and became disconnected from source, we became fearful that there was a finite amount of resources, finite amount of energy. So we decided to start fighting to steal other people's energy, which is also associated with power. So there's, you know, you're saying, what if humanity was born with this inherent knowing? But I actually believe that we were born with this, and that there was this forgetting, and that we're being invited into this deep remembering, and it's confronting. You know, it's like the Marianne Williamson quote, right? It's not that we feel we are not powerful, it's we fear that we are all powerful. Right. And what does it mean to fully inhabit ourselves as these powerful and really sexual beings? Because we came through sex, we came through orgasm.
Exactly. And that's the link that, you know, that's really the core of the point that I feel like that illustrates with life happening in a relationship is what is the source pathway? It's sexuality. And it's right there in the Genesis story too. Because, you know, Adam and Eve are living naked in this garden with this God who's giving them some no-nos, right? He's already got a don't do list.
Little sacred no-nos.
Right, which is just so baffling, by the way. I mean, I'm pretty biased right now because I've been like binging lectures on Gnostic Christianity, which is like fascinating. Like the Gnostic, the Nag Hammadi library, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like this shit will, if you were raised like Catholic or Christian like I was, the shit will blow your mind. But anyway, the Genesis story is full of this energy, and it's sexual. The woman unclothed with a serpent, which is a classic symbology of Isis, by the way, which Christianity borrowed. It's a very sexual thing. She's like, eat this luscious fruit, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like a drug bust and a punishment, and then the fall into darkness and separation, right? And instantly, it's funny, the man blames her, you know, which like this is source code. Like this is source code for like the people who founded this country, not this country, Costa Rica, but in America, were really influenced by this because they were using this operating system. So it's interesting to see, and that's just one example. You could probably find the same thing in the Quran. You could find it in, you know, the other major religions, I'm sure. There's this underlying story of man and woman, or man against woman, or man over woman, and even the other way, women over man, where there's like, you know, legends of matriarchy and, you know, female domination that exist in prehistory, apparently. So to reel it in, you know, going like 30,000 feet up right now. Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you as well, Ariel, is, you know, do you see yourself facilitating the coming back together, the remembering? Because you said you started working with women, been working with men, considering working with women again, you know, what does the reconciliation look like?
I definitely see myself doing more of that, and that those are spaces that I am currently facilitating, spaces where men and women can come together and actually acknowledge our erotic innocence and explore it in ways that are present and connected and alive. I feel like ultimately that's what needs to happen. It's like we're creating the spaces for men, we're creating the spaces for women so we can reconnect to those truths that live within us so that we can come back together. It requires a lot of humility to hold that space. Like in any leadership position, when we're facilitating these dialogues where there's so much charge and there can be so much anger and intensity and also desire, it's like creating a space where, you know what, no one actually has to be right here, because the finger pointing and the anger is actually what perpetuates staying disconnected. So how do we create spaces where no one actually has to be right? We don't actually need to know, but how do we just create spaces where everyone's voice can be there, where we're in ownership of our power, so that we're not using, I'm just going to speak my truth and use it as a spiritual bypassing way to like vomit on people in a way we don't have to take accountability for our actions. And it feels like the next step is bringing men and women together where we're learning how to embody our power. Okay, so how do we practice these skills in a way where we're not going to kill each other for making mistakes?
Yes, so well said. And this, like you said, this is the whole point of why we do men's work or women's work, or why we do somatic sexual healing, why we do relationship coaching, whatever. Like that's why, is because we want to come back together. We want to come back together, and like.
When I was watching, you were doing like conversations with Cadell and one other man, and one of the phrases you used was stabilizing the relational field from the perspective of community. So I feel like we relate with this, that one of the most important things that we can do together, like as humanity, is coming back into community with each other. We actually know each other. It's so easy to not be accountable and not be in alignment with our higher selves when we know that we're not going to see people that we know on a daily basis. And bringing it to sexuality, like I believe that hookup culture is the total antithesis of community. There's a new way that we're needing to learn how to be in relationship with each other, because if we don't know how to be connected when there's desire there, and when there's attraction there, and when there's sexuality there, and when we don't know how to communicate our emotions or be with our avoidant tendencies, we can't actually create cohesive community structures. So in doing this work around healing our relationship to our own masculinity and femininity as a man, healing your relationship as a woman, and like as a woman, seeing a man as your brother before you make him your lover. We're stabilizing the relational field in such a way where there aren't all these elephants in the room. Because if there's all the elephants in the room, communities can't actually deepen and expand and evolve, because it's full of the things that aren't being said. Right,
and this is, I love that you brought this up. The other gentleman was Daniel Dick. Shout out, because I know you did a video with Cadell, which I love. You know. Cadell, you owe me, brother. Love you. I'm so glad that you have taken initiative into the community. We have a book coming out, which is dope.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, this is like the macro perspective to tie it up in a neat bow and make it interconnected here is, you know, why do we do the work? Well, we do it to be with ourselves and come back into love and integrity. Great. Now what? Okay, now we want to be with man and woman, or, you know, whatever gender, whatever, you know, configuration, and then come into unity there. And then what's the point of that? Okay, it's the tribe, it's the collective. And so this is it's like a bottom up and a top down at the same time, where it's a toroidal healing journey of, okay, what are the number 1 and 2 reasons that communities fail? Sexuality and money and the shadows of them. Okay, great. Which one's deeper? Sexuality. Because sexuality, I believe, informs money and how we relate to it. So it's like going through that process, the way to stabilize the field is stabilize yourself, and then stabilize with a relationship with one person, even like you said, if it's not intimate, brother, sister first. Then you stabilize small groups, then the small groups can make councils can make communities, communities can make a nation. And so, you know,
I love that.
We've been separated and distanced for far too long. Some of it, I believe, is by design, a lot of it is just due to ignorance and unfortunate circumstances of where you were born, when you were born, how you were born, the way you learned to relate from your parents. So yeah, I feel like that's a good stopping point. And like, yeah, there's like so many like branching. It's funny because every time I do something like this, and like if someone who's as richly expressed as you, like I just want to like write after, or like, you know, I could like just go into another interview. Okay, we got to shelf this, but like let's open up 10 portals this way, because like there's so many, like everything is like so closely connected and charged that like these other topics are activated. But I wonder if you want to share, Ariel, like what's coming up for you the rest of this year, if you have any in-person offerings, or like if you want to share more about what your containers are looking like.
Totally. So in terms of virtual offerings, I have a men's container coming up called Attunement, and it's a container for men who really want to look at how a man leads is also the way he shows up as a lover. So this is really about coming into greater sensitivity with your own body so that you can experience more fulfillment with women, and also derive more fulfillment from your purpose and how you build communities in your own life. A woman's offering is coming up for me, which is like still, it's not in the offering phase right now, but it's for women who are really feeling themselves called as feminine leaders, looking at our relationship with money, about how that actually anchors us into the three-dimensional field. For it's women who are really wanting to heal their relationship with money so that we can become more embodied on this plane and more fully transmit our power into the world. So if you are a woman who's interested in that, I invite you to private message me. And then for those of you who are in the Hawaiian Islands, I'm pairing up with a good friend of mine named Shane Lee, who is a beekeeper on the Big Island. And we're having the Hawaii Intimacy Tour, and really looking at hive culture, bee culture, and the way that relates to creating intimacy in community. So right now we have communities on Oahu, Big Island, Maui, and Kauai who are all interested in having gatherings facilitated that invite your communities into deeper intimacy and connection with each other, so that you are able to expand and grow and evolve in more profound ways. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Hive culture.
Yeah.
So good. The bee is like a multi-dimensional like guide for humanity.
Oh my goodness.
Like,
And
it's
the
so
path
good.
of pollen, I'm being totally like blown wide open with the medicine shamanic way of the bee.
Oh,
Yeah.
fuck yeah. I love that. Well, Ariel, thank you so much. This has been exquisite to like meet in person and record this in person. And if y'all aren't following Ariel and her work, I highly encourage you to do so. She's tagged here on the Facebook on the live feed. If you're listening over on the podcast, you can find her in the show notes, and all her power and enunciation of this path is so admirable. So appreciate y'all. Sharing is caring. Leave me a review on iTunes. This is the Revolution Podcast. I love you guys. Peace from Costa Rica. Hasta luego. Boom. Thanks, family, for being here. Thanks for watching. Wow, some bombs in there. Sharing is caring. Tag somebody who gets to hear this a message. Share it out with your family, because yeah, by seeing something and hearing it, you start healing it. And so just leave that there. Ciao, ciao.